Welcome to Blooming Wildwood Homestead. Today we are discussing the topic of widespread food shortages and whether or not those are likely to affect us here in the United States. If you are listening to mainstream news at all, many outlets are telling us that here in America food shortages are not an issue and that there's really nothing to worry about. Even though we've heard conflicting information from leaders, even in our own country, then we get this other side that says, no, we don't need to worry about it. And so you might be hearing conflicting information on both sides. And if we listen to the farmers, they're saying that food shortages are a real probability based off of some of the challenges that they are facing today. So if we take a look at the evidence, it seems unlikely that there won't be some type of significant impact on our food supply, whether that's through the form of more shortages or through even higher cost and inflation on food. Today we're going to look at some of the challenges affecting primarily the wheat and corn crops. Now, there are many other aspects to food shortages and there are many other areas that might be affected, but the reason why I want to focus in mainly on these two crops is because you're going to find them in a lot of the foods that people are eating. So let's look at a few of the challenges that we're facing as far as being able to have the crops that we need to produce the food that we're accustomed to seeing in our supermarket on a regular basis. The first challenge that we're finding is crop availability. And under that umbrella comes the export situation. We know that there is a conflict going on right now between two countries that are major wheat producers. And because of that conflict, we're not seeing the exports coming out of one of those countries that we would typically see. Even though we may not be importing wheat from that country here in America, it does still affect our overall global food supply, and that is something that will end up affecting us here. In addition to the export reduction from one of those countries, we also just found out the news that India is closing off exports of wheat to most other countries as well. While India is not one of the largest exporters of wheat, they are the second largest producer of wheat. And the thought was that they were going to be able to increase production this year and help kind of close that gap of what was missing from some of the other countries. Additionally, there have been some reports that the United States themselves are also planning to export more wheat from our country to others to close some of that gap. While we're not importing from those countries, if we are increasing exports of what we do have here, that is going to reduce the amount that is here. So while on the surface it seems like maybe it's not really going to affect us because that's those countries over there, it will potentially end up affecting us just because of the fact that we are talking about picking up some of that slack. And as other countries are saying, no, we're not going to export any of our food, we're planning to keep it for ourselves, that's going to make a difference in how much is available here. The second part that falls underneath that crop availability would be planting and growing issues. If we take a look at corn, this is another one of those staples that is being affected mainly because it's not getting put into the ground in enough time to be able to come to maturity. And this definitely has the possibility of being very problematic. The USDA has already made some estimates that overall corn production is going to be down this year, which is something that has not happened very often. That's already a little bit concerning in and of itself. That decrease in production is likely because of the increased cost of production. And because of that increased cost of production, some farmers are opting to plant soybeans rather than corn, which means there will be less going in the ground. And also severe weather in areas where corn is typically planted and produced. In North Dakota and the northern part of South Dakota, they've really been hit with a lot of storms lately. And because of that, everything has been really wet. They've had a lot of rain going on there. And so that has caused the farmers to not even be able to prepare the ground and get that corn seed into the ground. And the corn that is in the ground is already behind schedule for what we would typically see in a planting year. So in addition to that, kind of bumping back over to the wheat side of things, while the Dakotas might have some areas that are getting too much rain, some of the areas where wheat is typically produced are having drought type conditions. If you take a look at some of the drought maps for the year, we really do have a large chunk of the United States that's falling under that drought warning, or they're saying that a drought is actually occurring right now. And Kansas is one of those states that is a large producer of wheat. Last year, they were the state with the most wheat production, and there are parts of Kansas right now that are under severe drought. Some places, according to the information that I was reading, said that they haven't had rain in 300 days. If you're trying to grow crops and you haven't had any rainfall in that amount of time, if you're able to keep the crop alive, we know that's going to stunt the growth of the plants and definitely going to negatively impact the harvest from those areas. So while we're hearing reports that we're still growing wheat here and everything's going to be fine and we have produced this certain amount of wheat in the past, we're seeing that there could be some reasons why that won't happen this year. So we have some issues with crop availability and how much is being produced. The other thing that we want to look at here is also the cost of production. If we look at the cost of production, farmers are having to pay much more in order to produce the same amount of food, which in turn is either going to cause them to plant less, change crops that they're going to plant, or they may opt not to plant at all if it doesn't look like they're going to be able to make a profit, particularly with some of the challenges that they've been facing right now with weather and other things. One of the big costs that is starting to really affect things would be diesel fuel costs. And if you've been kind of following things, there has been discussion of a diesel fuel shortage on the East Coast. And we have definitely seen prices all over the United States starting to skyrocket. Well, in the farming industry, all of the farm equipment, or most of the farm equipment that is being used, is going to run off of diesel fuel. That means that in order to plant and harvest and do all of the things that need to be done on the farm, it's going to cost the farmers more if they can get that fuel at all. And if for some reason that becomes an issue around harvest time, we are really going to be in for a major problem, because even if the food gets planted and it's growing, if it can't be harvested and transported to that end destination where it can be processed and turned into the food that you're accustomed to seeing, we're going to definitely see a shortage in that area. The second thing is the cost of seed itself has gone up, and some seed is harder to find depending on where you're getting it from or what type of seed that it is. So that's an added cost. We're also seeing increased fertilizer costs. And again, if you're able to get it, there have been fertilizer shortages, and that's going to impact both the cost and availability. That's one of the reasons why corn is not being planted in some locations or in the same quantity that it once was. And some of the farmers are opting to plant soybean this year because corn does require a high amount of fertilization in order to grow and come to maturity and have its best production. And then, of course, we have the issue of potential crop losses or crop reduction. Just because the crop gets in the ground, the wheat and the corn are planted, it doesn't mean that a big storm couldn't come through and knock the crop out. If farmers lose crops or have a reduced harvest, that's going to impact their profit, and that impacts how much it's going to cost for the manufacturers to purchase that product, which then in turn impacts how much it costs you to get those products. And it also will determine whether or not farmers opt to grow that again the following year. We are looking at a lot of challenging situations that are coming into play here. It would be nice to say we don't have to worry about food shortages here in America, but the reality is we have a lot of challenges coming into play, and those challenges have the potential to adversely impact our food supply. We've already seen food prices rising significantly in the last few months. And I believe that we won't see the true impact of these issues until later on this year and into next year. Because if you really think about it, right now we're eating off of the food that was harvested and the crops that were harvested prior to a lot of these events and situations taking place. So the impact of what's currently happening is not going to show up until the end of this growing season, which is something that is very concerning to me, given the fact that we're already seeing a lot of food inflation. So as new harvests are non-existent or diminished, we're going to see that impacting store shelves in one way or another. Whether you're able to find your food on the shelf or it's not there at all is going to impact you. Even if you can find your favorite food on the store shelves, the chances are very good that the cost of that may prohibit you from being able to purchase it. So either way, whether it was not on the shelf or whether it was too expensive while it was on the shelf, either way, you're not getting that food. And in some regards, both could be considered a food shortage. At least it is personally for you. Additionally, when food costs rise, donations to food banks and other charitable organizations go down. And people who are relying on those services in order to feed themselves are definitely going to be feeling a food shortage. So again, even though there might be some food on the shelf, families and individuals who are relying on charitable organizations for their food are definitely going to be feeling a shortage because people only have so much money to go around, and that tends to be one of the areas that gets affected when we see the prices of all of these different items going up. While it might not be something that we're going to see tomorrow, there is enough evidence to show that we will see some impact from this in the future, whether that be from not being able to get the food or from not being able to afford the food. It should make you stop and start to think a little bit more about how you can prepare to at least hedge against that food shortage or inflation, or try to to just put yourself in a little bit better position. And so I want to talk about 3 main things that I think that you can do to prepare and start hedging against food shortages and food inflation. The first being putting in a garden. It is not too late to start a garden if you have not already done so. This is the perfect time to start if you have never done one before. And if you are already an established gardener, this might be the time to consider expanding a little bit. I know that there are conflicting ideas on whether or not it's a good use of space to grow some wheat or grow some corn, but you have to do what's best for you. If you don't have space for that, consider what kind of crops could you be growing that are going to sustain you, that are going to be able to be preserved. What could you be growing? And if you have the space available, why not try growing a little bit of wheat and corn yourself? While you might not be able to have the size garden that you would need to feed yourself or your family and meet every single need, every little bit that you are producing this year is going to be helpful in offsetting some of those shortages or some of the food inflation that we are likely to see. The second way that you can begin to prepare is to prepare to preserve the harvest. Now, this might sound a little bit funny because I just said it wasn't too late to put in your garden, so you might have absolutely nothing in the ground. And here I am talking about preserving the harvest. Now is the time to start looking at these things because, as I stated earlier, we do have an increased cost in diesel fuel, which means that trying to ship things to you might become more expensive or might become more time consuming. We're used to getting things in a timely manner, but maybe they don't have as many trucks running, or maybe the plane is only carrying packages at one particular time and we're not able to get things as quickly as we were in the past. So start thinking about what kind of food are you going to grow, or are you growing, and how could you preserve that harvest? There are so many ways that you could preserve some of what you grow, whether that be through freezing items, dehydrating items, canning things. All of those methods of food preservation are going to be beneficial for you. Just think about how you might want to preserve some of those items in the future, and use this time right now to begin gathering your supplies, whether that's getting freezer bags for items you're going to freeze, maybe investing in a dehydrator if you haven't done that already, or maybe taking stock of the trays in your dehydrator and thinking about if any of them need replacement, or if you need a different type of tray for something that you want to preserve this year and getting that ordered. Or maybe it's getting your canning supplies. If you already have some of the basics, do you need more lids? Do you need more jars? What kinds of things are you going to need this year to preserve the food that you are growing? And take this time right now to begin preparing for that, so that when harvest season comes along, you're not having to stress about the fact that you couldn't get what you needed in order to preserve that food that really needs to be put up right now. The third item on this list is to continue to add to your pantry. This is something that we've talked about frequently. We've talked about restocking our pantry, but just continuing to add a few staples to your pantry every time you go out to shop. It doesn't have to be a whole cartload full of things that are going to go in the pantry, but what can you add every time you go to the store? We know the cost of things is going up. I purchased some wheat berries the first part of March, and those were out of stock for quite a while. They just came back in stock today, but the cost is double what I paid for it. And I had watched the cost go up like in a couple of days when I first originally purchased it. So just from that time, the first part of March until now, 2 months later, we're looking at double the cost for wheat berries. And like I said, they weren't even in stock for quite a while. They just came back in today. So we know the cost of food is going up drastically, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So whatever you're purchasing today is going to be a benefit to you in the future. No one knows exactly what's going to happen in the future. All we can do is look at the evidence that is presented to us and try and make the best decisions that we can based off of that evidence. And I hope today's video was helpful to you in just being able to maybe organize some of your thoughts around why you think the way that you do, or to maybe help enlighten you if you hadn't considered the fact that we do have a lot of challenges facing our food production, and maybe it's time to take some steps to start preparing. Either way, if today's video was helpful, don't forget to click like, and we would love to have you subscribe and be part of our community here at Blooming Wildwood Homestead. We have a lot of gardening videos coming up, and before too long, we will be into our food preservation time, and I'm excited to share with you some of the different things that we'll be canning and dehydrating, freezing, all the stuff, because I like to use a wide variety of food preservation methods. Until next time, bye everyone.